It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? It's a neighborly day in this beauty wood, a neighborly day for a beauty. Please, won't you be my neighbor? I have always wanted to have a neighbor just like you. I've always wanted to live in a neighborhood with you. So let's make the most of this beautiful day. Since we're together, we might as well say, please, won't you be my neighbor? I'll be back next time. Bye-bye.
What a beautiful morning. It's great to be a horse on a day like this.
Well, is everything straightened out?
We are ready whenever you are.
Doesn't it look like I am ready? I am always ready. I have been ready since first call. I am ready. Roll.
Quiet, please. This is a take.
Settle. Roll, please. Speed.
Action.
Action.
Okay, Pugsley, I'll give you another 1,000 watts.
I'm going to say a few things. I'm going to say some bad words. You're just going to have to deal with it.
This is the best thing that's ever happened to us in our entire career as teenagers.
Welcome to the third race at the Honeymoon is Over Downs. They're at the gate, and they're off. Jumping out in the lead is Romance and Affection, with Domestic Bliss in close behind. It's Romance and Affection and Domestic Bliss. Here comes Marriage Vows, followed by Immediate Child. Romance and Affection falling off quickly. Mortgaged Up the Ass, overtaking Domestic Bliss. And here comes Nasty Attitude, followed by More Children and Drinking Heavily. Coming down the backstretch, Drinking Heavily moving out in front of Mortgaged Up the Ass. But coming on strong on the outside is Credit in Shambles. It's Credit in Shambles, followed by I Don't Give a Shit, Nasty Attitude, and Up Yours Keep. Up Yours Keep challenging for second, going into the clubhouse turn. Passing on the rail is I Don't Give a Shit, taking the lead. Followed by the f***ing house. You cook like shit, and I f*** your brother. Here they come, spinning out of the turn. I Don't Give a Shit still in front. Up Yours Keep challenging for the lead. Up Yours Keep and I Don't Give a Shit neck and neck. And down the stretch they come. Up Yours Keep is pulling away from I Don't Give a Shit by a length. Coming on strong is I Am Out of Here, and passing the pack is the f***ing house. And at the wire, it's Up Yours Keep the house, I Don't Give a shit, and I am out of here.
It is Sunday morning, January 18th, 2026. How you doing, kids? It's JC. We're here for the next 2 hours telling stories about things that happened in the golden age of radio. They talk about the golden age of radio being like the 40s and the 30s, but the golden age of radio was pretty much the late 60s, 70s, and 80s before the corporate guys came in and just ruined everything. And they did a very good job of it, by the way. I'll give them that. When they want to ruin something, they are very, very efficient. They ruin an entire industry because you know what they did? They got rid of the one thing that made radio completely different than everything else that's out there. Streaming, anything on the internet, anything on YouTube, whatever. They got rid of the larger-than-life, big-shot local DJ. And when they did that and just figured, hey, this is costing us way too much money, we've got shareholders to deal with because now we're not some locally owned outfit. We are a corporate entity. It is all about Wall Street, and that's why you hear what you hear. Except here on News Talk STL 1019-94.1, because on Saturday night from 6 till 9, we do something that no other radio station in St. Louis is doing. And then here on Sunday morning, well, it's just a different thing because there's very few people who are still in the business that are of, shall we say, a certain age who were around for everything. You know, I got to St. Louis in 1984, but I had an entire 10-year career before I ever got to St. Louis. And I worked in Chicago. I worked in Washington, D.C. with Howard Stern. I did all this stuff. And then, of course, when we hit St. Louis, then the floodgates just opened, and it was just one thing after another with people visiting us visiting people, and a veritable plethora of show business types, music stars, comedians, a couple of dancers here and there, and just a lot of star power. As the promos say, JC has interviewed over 2,000 celebrities, and that's a conservative estimate because, frankly, I think it's more than 3,000, but I just don't think people would believe it if I said 3,000. But I can document the whole thing, and it's just a numbers game because between 1985 and 1999, I went to Los Angeles 175 times, and during that same period to New York 225 times. So, about 425 total trips to New York and LA, and I took copious notes. I was always writing down what was happening, and I kept track of all this stuff. We eventually threw it all into a computer, and now on Sunday mornings from 7 until 9 o'clock, it spews out. I'm like the frickin' Bellagio. And then, like I said, if you miss any part of this show, it pops up on podcast on Monday morning on the News Talk STL free app. Now, because of copyright rules, I didn't make them, because of copyright rules, all of the music parts of the presentation have to be edited out, and it's me just talking. If you have ever noticed any other podcast, I don't care if it's Amy Poehler or Mark Maron or Joe Rogan or any of those people, there's never any music on those shows, and there isn't because it's not legal. So as far as podcasting is concerned, all those copyright laws get in the way. So we have to chop it up. We have to edit out all the music, but eventually something still very much worth listening to comes your way starting on Monday morning on the News Talk STL free app. All right, as we always do to kick off the show, it is something called the Weekend Pickup, a collection of pretty pointless, useless, edge of your seat stories that come from every corner of the globe, even though globes can't have corners. Geez, you're going to get on me with something technical already. Let's go to press. I think we talked about this a couple of months ago, years ago. It was probably the late 90s. A Playboy search bus van type vehicle came to cities all over the country, including St. Louis. And in this particular case, they parked out in front of what was once the Clarion Hotel, which is coming down, But anyhow, so they parked out there, and they basically said, if you think you've got what it takes to be in Playboy magazine, you show up, and we're going to take pictures of you. And who knows? This is America, after all, and who knows whether or not a completely unknown gal in the Midwest from the St. Louis area might be the next Playmate of the Year. Who knows? And I was there most of the day. What a surprise. Well, I was actually there shooting a story for, I think it was Channel 4 at that time. And it was a really sorry thing to watch. I hate to put it that way, but it was. It was really sad because these women who you wouldn't even give a second look at in a bar showed up in like thongs and, very skimpy little outfits and just horrifying makeup and hairstyles. And they just came marching in proud as can be. A lot of times their husbands or boyfriends were with them, and they're just looking as proud as punch, as Hubert Humphrey used to say. And just to sit there and think to myself, wow. I mean, on one hand, it's great, especially with the situations where the men were along. I think it's really, really cool, as a matter of fact, that these guys thought that their wives were pretty enough to be in Playboy. That's what they saw when they looked at their wives. Didn't matter that when we looked at them, it was like, yeah, next. But, that's encouraging to think that the guy, in his eyes, what he saw was something different than the rest of us. But it was a disturbing experience, let's put it that way. I mentioned that because there's an open casting call right now that's been announced for the Baywatch reboot, and applicants are encouraged to avoid, quote, overly revealing styles and costumes, end quote. I don't know. Have these people seen Baywatch? I mean, come on. everything's going up, including Spotify. They raised all their subscription rates from $1 to $2 a month, depending on the plan. This makes them now the most expensive major music streaming service. John Mellencamp, if you're not aware of it, has a daughter by the name of Teddy, T-E-D-D-I, and she's very, very sick. She has brain cancer. And John Mellencamp was being interviewed the other day and said that Teddy is suffering right now. It does not look good. Let's just leave it at that. I like Hillary Duff. I don't know why. There's something about her. I think, obviously she's cute. She's only about 5 feet tall, and she's sort of built like a fire hydrant a little bit, but she's in proportion, and she's just cute, and that's all I can tell you. The fact that she was, 12 years old or something when she started on some Disney Channel or whatever, that's not what I'm going for. I'm talking about she's a grown woman right now. She's like 40 years old or something. And I guess she's trying to change her squeaky clean image a little bit or a lot. She has a new new album. The single is called Roommates. I'm going to recite for you now some of the lyrics. I only want the beginning. I don't want the end. Want the part where you say, God damn. Back of the dive bar giving you head. Then sneak home late. Wake up your roommates. Want the highlights? 10 out of 10. The butterflies from holding your hand. Before we swept us under the bed and we became practically roommates. I'm touching myself, looking at porn, 'cause you don't even look my way no more. Like I said, I like Hillary Duff. Starting to like her even more. A 72-year-old fisherman in Canada facing assault charges after allegedly attacking someone for fishing too close to him. Perhaps the most Canada story I've ever read. It's a federal crime for someone who's not a postal worker to wear United States Postal Service uniforms, unless you're acting in a play, TV show, or movie. A Halloween costume, by the way, isn't a good enough excuse. You can get a fine, or you can get 6 months in prison for dressing like a postal worker. It's not like the Postal Service is archaic enough. They got to have a law in there. It sounds like something left over from the 1850s. But, I like what Seinfeld said about the post office.
I think it's weird that we use the term mail for email and the Postal Service. What is the similarity in email, a digital fiber optic hyperspeed network, versus this dazed and confused distant branch of the Cub Scouts? Bumbling around the streets in embarrassing shorts and jackets with meaningless patches and victory medals. Driving 4 miles an hour, 20 feet at a time on the wrong side of a mentally handicapped Jeep. I love how the post office has this emotional financial meltdown every 3.5 years that their business model from 1630 isn't working anymore. I cannot understand how a 21st century information system based on licking, walking, and a random number of pennies is struggling to compete. And they always push the Postmaster General out on TV to explain their difficulties, and he's all freaked out. He's got rings under his eyes, no shave. We can't make this work anymore. The infrastructure is killing us. We gotta go up a penny on the stamps. We're just trying to make it to the end of the month. And we're all sitting there at home going, hey, dude, relax. We don't even know how much a stamp is anymore. 48, 49, make it $1. You're gonna get there. You got some money left over, buy yourself some pants and a real car. I would say to the Postal Service, since I'm here in Washington, if you actually want to be helpful to us, just open the letters, read them, and email us what it says.
Not bad. Not bad. A journalism professor in Canada got all his news from AI bots for a full month. And his advice is, don't do that. The news it fed him was fully accurate just 47% of the time. Partially accurate 45% of the time, and 8% was pure BS. A team in South Korea came up with a spray-on powder that seals wounds and stops bleeding, literally in 1 second. Somebody going to make a lot of money. Bob Weir, the Grateful Dead, left an estimated $60 million to his survivors. Sting paid Stuart Copeland and Andy Summers $800,000 to settle a lawsuit over royalties, but their lawyers called it a historic underpayment. I got to tell you something. A lot of times people will say, well, who's the prettiest actress that you ever interviewed, or who's the funniest comedian, or who was the nicest person, or whatever. They rarely ask who was the biggest a-hole, because that's a very short list, and on that list is Stuart Copeland of the Police. And I'll tell you what happened. We were broadcasting live at the Grammys in Los Angeles, and he was on the list of people to come by. And he had a new band called Animal Logic. It was him, some other guy, and then some chick singers, 3 people. And the music was, well, first of all, have you ever heard of it? I mean, it was this was 30 years ago. Have you ever heard of it? No. You know why? Because it sucked. And he was mad when he saw anything that said classic rock. He associated that with a radio station that plays absolutely no new music. And so he came, sat down, and because we were a classic rock station, just acted like a dick the entire time. And when he got up and left, we actually yelled stuff at him, but he didn't hear it. Instacart released a list of the 10 most popular Super Bowl snack purchases, and I never would have guessed these, certainly not in this order. Tortilla chips, potato chips, salsa, and scallions. Approximately 1 out of every 18 people has a third nipple. That seems like a lot, but some of them are very small. They just look like freckles or moles. Like I said, lots of very, very useful information on this show. A guy who teaches public speaking is going viral for a tip on how to command a conversation. He says it's something FBI agents are taught, and it can prevent people from interrupting you in the middle of a story. The tip is to start with something called a command pause. You use an opening line to grab their attention, like, listen to this, or check this out, it's nuts. Then you pause before you launch into the actual story. Pausing for a beat reinforces the listener's brain that what you're about to say is important, so they'll shut up for 5 seconds and let you talk. Bears beat the Packers last weekend in one of the most exciting football games anybody will tell you they've ever seen. In 1967, that was 59 years ago, the Green Bay Packers won the first Super Bowl, beating the Chiefs 35-10. Bart Starr, the Green Bay quarterback, was the game MVP. Tickets, by the way, for the very first Super Bowl, a whopping $10. Geez, I think it's like double that now. Happy Days premiered on ABC 52 years ago this week. Jane Curtin and Dan Aykroyd debuted the Coneheads on Saturday Night Live 49 years ago this week. In 1994 this week, Harry Nilsson died at the age of only 52. He had all his hits like Without You, Everybody's Talking. He wrote One, the Three Dog Night song, and he worked with John Lennon, Ringo, and Keith Moon. He was a giant druggie. He was one of the people with Robin Williams and John Belushi. The night before, Belushi got that fatal speedball, which killed him back in, 1980, I believe. This week, in 2009, Sully Sullenberger safely landed that jet disabled by a bird strike in the Hudson River. Instant hero status. And in 2018, the lead singer of the Cranberries, Dolores O'Riordan, died of a accidental drowning. She was only 46. A guy in Wisconsin got arrested after he was caught driving under the influence while 21 times over the legal limit. His blood alcohol levels 0.427. He'll be honored before the Packers' first home game next season. Good morning, everybody. When I was a little boy, I thought that when I grew up, quicksand and octopuses, I thought were going to be a lot more problems for me because every show I watched had either quicksand or octopuses. Octopuses, by the way, one of the most intelligent creatures on the planet, capable of solving complex puzzles, using tools, escaping captivity, opening screw-top jars, and stacking rocks to protect the entrances to their dens. I know people in Perryville that can't do all that. Yosemite National Park has struggled to design garbage cans because they have to be easy enough for humans to open, but complex enough so that bears can't. And they found there is a, quote, considerable overlap between the intelligence of the smartest bears and the dumbest tourists. Boy, some of the stuff that I'm reading here today is not encouraging for the human race at all. Dave Grohl, Foo Fighters, 57 this week. Jason Bateman, 57. Steven Soderbergh, who directed, Magic Mike, Traffic, Aaron Brockovich, Oceans 11, 12, and 13. And, of course, White Palace was not his movie, but he showed up at the premiere in St. Louis at the Shady Oak, which isn't there anymore. Holland Taylor from 2.5 Men is 83. Faye Dunaway, 85. This weekend, Lin-Manuel Miranda is turning 46. Mr. Hamilton. Albert Pujols, 46. Kate Moss, 52. Zooey Deschanel had a birthday yesterday, 46. Michelle Obama turned 62. Jim Carrey, 64. Susanna Hoffs of the Bengals, 67. Steve Harvey, 69. I used to work out of his studio in Chicago once in a while when he wasn't there. Maury Povich, 87. Kevin Costner, 71. This week back in 1954, Marilyn Monroe married her second husband, a guy named DiMaggio. Perhaps you've heard of him. Sanford and Son premiered this week back in 72. Fantasy Island premiered on ABC on this date back in 77. The Simpsons officially kicked off its first season on Fox. It was technically their second episode after first airing a Christmas special back in mid-December. This was all 36 years ago. Alan Rickman died at the age of 69. He was the die-hard villain, Hans Gruber. He was in the Harry Potter movies. He was in a tremendous movie called Bottle Shock about the explosion of the California wine industry back in the early 1970s. Great movie, by the way. And 33 years ago this week, in 1993, David Letterman announced he was leaving NBC for CBS. All in the Family debuted 55 years ago this week. Carlos Santana became the first Hispanic inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame 28 years ago this week in 1998. That year's other inductees included Fleetwood Mac, Mamas and Papas, and the Eagles. Kiefer Sutherland, you probably read, got arrested for attacking an Uber driver. Daniel Stern got arrested for soliciting a prostitute. Timothy Busfield from The West Wing and Field of Dreams facing child sexual abuse charges. What the hell is going on out there? I know a woman who is 62 and feels that she is old and shriveled up and not attractive or appealing anymore. And I remind her that, for example, somebody like this, Julia Louis-Dreyfus this week, turning 65. Looks pretty damn good if you ask me. And speaking of celebrities that are turning the corner, shall we say, Reese Witherspoon turns 50. Actually, everybody on this list turns 50 this year. Reese Witherspoon, Ryan Reynolds, Colin Farrell, Benedict Cumberbatch, Rashida Jones, Peyton Manning, Alicia Silverstone, Cillian Murphy, or is it Cillian? Jeez, I always forget. Mr. Murphy, Melissa Joan Hart. What was that show she was on that had the talking cat? I can't remember. Baby Spice and Isla Fisher, who used to be married to Borat. And, of course, 32 years ago this week in 1994, two of Tonya Harding's chubby hoodlum bodyguards were arrested and charged with conspiracy in the clubbing of Nancy Kerrigan. Why me? Why me? It seems like everybody is jumping ship over at, well, I guess it was called, FanDuel. Alexa Dat, who is doing the pregame stuff and the postgame stuff, is heading back home to the Washington, D.C. area. Derek Gould, the beat writer for the Cardinals for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, is fine. A couple of days ago, somebody started something on social media that he was diagnosed with some awful disease or something and was on his way out, and he had to go online and say, I'm fine. But there's a couple of websites that, I'm not going to name them, but there's a couple of websites that invoke the name of some version of the Cardinals, Redbirds, whatever. There's two of them that I know of for sure, and at least a couple of times a week, they put up a phony story. It's usually about somebody getting traded or somebody getting fired or some major development with regard to the roster or the Cardinal organization or whatever. And they're the ones who started this too. And it's because the Facebook people primarily have just turned their back. And it's the Wild West now. You can do whatever you want. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, doing whatever they want means, I don't know, just entertaining themselves. And at the same time, if you're a friend or a family member of Derek Gould or the Post-Dispatch and you read that, you're thinking to yourself, oh my God, no. And it's all BS. There should be some way to stop people like that. But apparently there isn't. This past Thursday, the 15th, we had an ice storm in 1997, and man, I remember it too because it was thick ice. I used to live at the bottom of a hill, and we had people come over. They couldn't get back up the hill. We lost Glenn Fry of the Eagles 10 years ago. I was working at a radio station at the time with people that I didn't want to be working with. But sometimes that happens, and you just got to suck it up. There's sometimes these circumstances are what they are, and you got to take what's available. And sometimes the situation is less than perfect. Let's just sort of leave it at that. So this guy won a radio contest to be a sportscaster. And he sent it a tape. I was like, hello again, everybody. It's time for the sports. And they gave him a job. And then he thought he was a real broadcaster. And then he got stuck working with me, or I got stuck working with him. And the only sort of training he had, the only influence he had, was from another really, really bad guy who saw himself as some sort of consultant / sports radio guru or something. And he believed that there should never be a radio show where there wasn't arguing going on, that everything had to be, you're on one side, this guy's on the other, and they would just battle it out, and that's what people wanted to hear, is people arguing with one another. So that's what he believed. So we get the word that Glenn Fry of the Eagles passes away, and a lot of people were very, very saddened by that. And we used to do a little conference call the night before every show. And he's like, okay, so tomorrow I'll just say Glenn Fry was an idiot and a jerk and lousy music and everything like that. And then you guys get, I was like, hold on, just wait a minute. Hold on 1 minute. You're going to go on the air tomorrow and take the position that Glenn Fry was some sort of big loser. Yeah, because we have to have conflict. I'm going, do you understand that the passing of Glenn Fry, for a lot of people who are maybe a little bit older than you, this is like a really sad moment. And you're going to go on the air on a show that I'm involved in, and you're going to try to tell people that Glenn Fry was some sort of jackass. And we started arguing about it. And I said to him, I go, let me just ask you a question. You were on the air the day after Stan Musial passed away. When you went on the air that day on your show, did you or did somebody on your show take the position that Stan Musial was some sort of big loser? Well, no, because it was Stan Musial. Right, because Glenn Fry is Glenn Fry. I just ended up saying, you know what? I'm going to sit out tomorrow. You guys do the show on your own. I won't be there tomorrow. And I just hung up at that point. Needless to say, the show did not continue much longer. This is the sort of crap that goes on behind the scenes. I used to tell stories about how Mary Ellen Owens and Sarah Clark, who used to do the morning show on The Point back in the 90s, this would have been the mid-90s, these two, oh my God, we had the office right next to them, which was downstairs and sort of away from everything. And these two used to get off the air a couple of times a week. And you know how sometimes an argument turns into the sort of situation where you're like, oh, I see. The gloves are off. Now anything can be said, and you start saying things that you say to somebody when you realize, I'm never going to talk to this person again. This is the last day this person will be my friend or my coworker. I'm airing it all out because we are freaking finished. And they would say things to one another that were just unbelievable. And the next morning, they'd be in the studio together. I never quite understood how that worked. All right, that is the weekend pickup. That's how we start JC's Sunday Showgram every Sunday morning here on 101.9, 94.1, and the News Talk STL free app. We have an anniversary coming up here that was very, very important in Rams history. We're going to talk about that. Later on, we have Adam Sandler. I really honestly hope that this next segment doesn't come out sounding like a really pathetic imitation of Letters to Penthouse. But let me just go into it and you'll understand what I'm talking about. So it was the Rams' 1999 season, the Super Bowl year, that went into the playoffs in 2000. Now, I had just been divorced. And I mean like just 2.5 months. Everything was still very, very fresh. And I was away from my kids and, in an apartment, actually in a condo in Brentwood Forest. And your whole life just completely changes. Oh, and by the way, one of the things they don't tell you about divorce is that when you get married, you lose a lot of your friends because she doesn't like them. And you're trying to be a good husband. You're like, okay, if you don't want me to hang out with those people. And then what happens is after a while, you realize, hey, wait a minute. All of the friends that we see on a regular basis are all her friends. None of these people are my friends. So guess what happens when the divorce hits? All of a sudden, you don't have any freaking friends. And you got to go back to all those people you were friends with before you got married and say, will you take me back? It's one of those dirty little secrets, I'm telling you. So the Rams were, we didn't know it for sure at the time, but they were on their way to the Super Bowl. And I hadn't been to many Rams games. And I had lost my press pass because I was off the air at the time. So I'm divorced. I'm kicked out of my house. I'm away from my kids. I don't have a job. And let me tell you, I'm not ashamed to say it was a very, very rough time. An extremely difficult time. So I was doing this thing at the time called JC Mail. And I think it was twice a week I would put out this is when email still was sort of the primary method of communication on the internet. And, so I put out this thing called JC Mail, and it was basically a blog. And I was flabbergasted by how many people subscribed to it. There were thousands and thousands of people that were picking this thing up every week. And I was pretty depressed that all this Ram stuff was going on and that I hadn't seen hardly any of the games. And so I took a chance, and as part of JC Mail, I said, here's the deal. I would love to go to this Rams game. I mean, it's the playoffs, and I haven't seen any games, so here's the deal. Somebody out there has got to have an extra ticket. You got to have an extra ticket, and you're thinking to yourself, who are we going to give this ticket to or sell it to or whatever the case may be? What are we going to do? So somebody I know has a spare ticket. So here's what you do. Get a hold of me via the JC Mail here. Just bounce it back. And what I'll do is I'll buy the first 2 rounds of drinks for your entire group, regardless of how many there are. I'll buy the first 2 rounds. So I get a response from a woman she just seemed very, very nice. And she's like, yeah, I got an extra ticket. And we have a group of like 6. But it would just basically, they're just people I know from having sat in the seats all season. So it would be just you and me. But you come along. I'm like, okay, well, I absolutely know in the back of my mind, this is really all about going to the game and maybe just meeting some nice people, whatever the case may be. I know that this woman is not going to be some bathing beauty. I know she ain't going to be an oil painting. I know she's probably going to weigh about 350 pounds. I don't care. She seemed like a very, very nice person, and so why not? And it sounded like a nice proposition, so I said, okay, fine. How do you want to do this? And she said, well, why don't you come to my house on Saturday and pick up the ticket, and then I will already be downtown, so we'll just meet up at the game. I'm like, absolutely fine. Where do you live? She lives in U City. Fine. I will come over on a Saturday afternoon. I will pick up the ticket. How very, very nice of you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. So I get in the car, and I drive over, and there she is standing in the door, and she's beautiful. She's 32. She's a lawyer, and she's a knockout. Turned out, as I talked to her a little bit more there, that she had also just been recently divorced, and that's why she was available. Because otherwise, you'd look at her and go, no way is this chick unattached. So anyhow, we go to the game. We have a very, very nice time. Really, really nice group of people. And 2 things happened as a result of that game. The first thing that happened was we got a bird's eye view of what will go down as perhaps the most famous reception by a St. Louis Rams player in Rams football history.
With 4 minutes left, it looked like the storybook season might finally end.
You can start to hear it maybe in the background like, okay, if we don't win this game, it's still a great year. Just as that thought came into my head, I see Kurt loft one over to the corner. Well, here's Isaac and Torrey looking at it. And there's Marshall out of the backfield looking at the pass, and I'm like, well, he's throwing it away. It's going to no one. Proehl?
What a time to do it. Ricky Proehl, no touchdown catches all year.
Ricky caught the game-winning touchdown pass to put us into the Super Bowl. You don't write it any better.
The St. Louis Rams are Super Bowl bound. You gotta love it.
The Rams had taken a long road to a Super Bowl berth, but they knew their journey was not yet complete.
That's right. Got to see the catch. So that was the first thing that came out of it. And the second thing that came out of it is that young gal and I began dating, and we dated on and off for a couple of years. So just when you think you know everything, get ready for a big surprise. And now let's switch over to hockey. All right. Everybody knows the Doug Gilmour story. Ended up coming to St. Louis. One of the better and more prolific goal scorers for your St. Louis Blues. And Doug used to do our show a couple of times a week. He'd come in and we would talk Blues hockey. We'd sort of hang out. And that went on for a couple of years. And Doug was a great guy. We enjoyed having him. And then there was the scandal. And if you were around during that time, you know what happened. There was like 14-year-old babysitter involved, and there were some letters found that were very explicit that indicated, or they seemed to indicate that, shall we say, illegal things, because she was only 14, had gone on, and that was the end of Doug Gilmour. Now, just, socially, I had run into Doug Gilmour's wife a couple of times. Oh, you are so good to Doug on the show, and we love the segments, and oh, good, and she just seemed sort of interested in the radio business, just sort of, as a casual observer, just wanting to know how things worked and asking lots of questions. Very, very pretty, by the way. That was pretty much it. But now Doug has to leave town, and I think they were, the family was sort of caught in between the team that Doug had gotten traded to and all of their ties and all of their connections in their entire life in St. Louis. And my phone began to ring at like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And when my phone rings at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm like anybody else. Okay, who died? And you go lunging for the phone. A lot of people turn off their phones now because of, the cell phone. It's just really easy to do, obviously. And a lot of people don't want to be bothered. And they figure, hey, if somebody died, whether I find out at 3 a.m. or 7 a.m. isn't going to matter anyhow. So I'm shutting my phone off. At least that way I get a good night's sleep guaranteed. But in those days, when your phone rang, remember how it used to be? I'm a child of the 50s and 60s, okay? When the phone rang, everybody went running for it. And brothers and sisters would fight over who was going to answer the phone. Now, so you look at it, you're looking at your phone going, I don't recognize that number. Let it ring. It's just a seismic shift in our attitudes about telephones in the last 50 or 60 years. So anyhow, I answer the phone. Well, it's Doug's wife, and she's loaded, and she is, I think the technical term is horny, and I know exactly what's going on. Doug is 1,500 miles away in Calgary or something, and she wants to play, and all I can think about is what do I know about hockey players again? They know how to fight. That's right. I'm gonna get my head knocked off. And so I'm being as non-committal as possible, and it ain't working. And that went on for the better part of, I don't know, like the whole second half of the hockey season. She was always calling me in the middle of the night. I'm just watching my life pass before me. And on top of it, Doug's my pal, right? Now, obviously, the relationship suffered a little bit when he had to be traded and he was no longer around. We didn't see him all the time, but I still considered him a friend. And it's like, you can't do that to your friend. keep in mind, she's a knockout, and she's making it abundantly clear what she wants. But Mama didn't raise no fool, and I never acted on anything. I never said anything to Doug about it either. But they broke up shortly after that, and it was Joe Micheletti, as a matter of fact, former blues player turned broadcaster, who said, yeah, neither one of them could wait for the other one to leave town. So as far as I know, she could have been calling an entire list of guys, and I just happened to be on the list for some reason. Sometimes discretion is the better part of valor.
Radio? Who needs a radio?
Like what you're hearing? Don't forget JC's Wayback Machine every Saturday night from 6 until 9 on 101.9 and 94.1 News Talk STL and the free News Talk STL app.
A very wise woman who was my news director at Channel 2 once said, I think it's really difficult for women to grow old on television. Meaning that, you get hired at 22, 23 years old in a city the size of St. Louis, and some people come and go, but some people stay for decades. And as that time goes on, you look at those tapes from, 40 years ago, 1985, and, this is very, very young, pretty, beautiful, gorgeous thing, but now they're maybe in their 50s or 60s, or even older than that in some cases, and nobody looks as good at 70 as they do at 25. It's just a fact of life. That shouldn't be what you're judging the effectiveness of a newscaster on anyhow. You should be judging that person, male or female, on whether or not they do a good, credible job. But people being what they are, oftentimes, I think she's ugly, that sort of stuff. So right before I moved to St. Louis in 1984, we were, you're in Buffalo, New York, and your wardrobe stinks because it's got to be functional, and everything is boots and parkas and scarves and all that sort of stuff. Not exactly a place for fashion. And you come walking into some place, and they're like, we would get these invitations for parties, and back then they used to occasionally do a record listening party. Somebody would put out a new album, and they would have a listening party, and everybody from all media and everything like that would load into some place, and they would feed you and wine you and dine you, and you would sit there and be listening to it, and they would hope that you would play that music and say wonderful things about that album and about that artist. And every once in a while, we got something really good. The Playboy clubs still existed in the world back in the early 1980s. And in fact, there was a Playboy club in Buffalo, New York. And one day, through some sort of clerical error or something, a bunch of us from the radio station got invited to some sort of a luncheon deal at the Playboy club. Now, again, like I said, I'm looking at my wardrobe and like, do I go with my blue jeans or my snow pants? I don't even think I owned a suit. So I put on the nicest thing that I had in my wardrobe, which I guess a sweater or something. We go marching into this place, and sure enough, there's all these Playboy bunnies running around, and everything was like in velour, and it's just the way things were in 1984. And you're sort of walking around, and you're taking shrimp from the buffet and stuffing it into your coat pocket to eat later. And they're walking you around. They make a little presentation. And the girls couldn't have been nicer. And they're so young and so pretty. And they had their little Playboy bunny outfits on. Now, my career had taken some really weird twists and turns because a couple of years prior to that, I had worked in Chicago. And occasionally we would get invited to the Playboy Club headquarters on Michigan Avenue, right next to the Hancock Building in Chicago. We'd get invited to those things, and those were incredible parties. And Hugh Hefner was there, and Barbie Benton was there. You had a couple of, Playboy Centerfold of the Year. All these women were there. Anyhow, we're in Buffalo, and I meet a very nice young gal by the name of Randy, and she was very nice. And a couple of months later, I moved to St. Louis. And there's a young, up-and-coming female sportscaster on Channel 2 by the name of Randy Naughton. And some pictures of her in her Playboy bunny outfit had surfaced, and she was terrified that those things were going to come out somehow, and that it would tarnish her reputation or her credibility as a news anchor. But a funny thing happens with women. They reach a certain age, and they just don't give an F anymore. And in fact, they want everybody to see how good they once looked. So she went from, oh my God, I hope these pictures never surface, to, hey, you want to see how great I used to look? Hey, Randy, I got news for you. You look pretty damn good right up to the end. This show goes to podcast every Monday morning on that News Talk STL app without all the music and music segments that we feature here on the show. It's because of copyright infringement laws. If you have noticed, the podcasts that you listen to don't have any music, and that's because it's illegal. And that's why we can't podcast the Saturday night show either, because that's all music. So what we do is we chop it up, we extract things that involve copyright ownership, and then we edit all that together. And it comes out about maybe hour and a half of really fresh stuff. And that is available to you on the News Talk STL app beginning every Monday morning. So I played this last night on the show. I thought it was worth playing again because not everybody had a chance to hear it. Like I said, we can't replay it. But a couple of years back when Adam Sandler was doing the movie The Wedding Singer, I went out to, I think that was actually in New York. Went to New York and I got a chance to interview Adam. If you read a lot of Hollywood and showbiz type stuff, you'll notice that people often, when they are interviewed and they talk about some of their favorite people in Hollywood, it is not uncommon for Adam Sandler's name to come up. He is an extraordinarily nice guy. But I do have to tell you another story. When I was on KMOX in 1993, Adam Sandler was performing at I think it was called Catch a Rising Star at Union Station. He was doing a gig there, and we called up his representation, and we said, would Adam be interested in being on the show on KMOX? And he said, yeah. So sure enough, he comes strolling in one day, and he's got a guy with him who I later learned name was Steve Koren, Koren. And I'll get to the rest of that story in just a minute. So Adam gives me a great interview, and I still remember really making him laugh. And when you're a talk show host and you get a comedian to laugh, especially laugh really hard at a joke that you make, it's like the greatest feeling in the world. Maybe that is psychotic. I don't know, maybe it is. But I can tell you, I'm not the only one who will tell you that. Because you figure, well, we try to be funny on an ongoing basis. We're not stand-up comedians, but we do our best to make jokes and make people laugh. It's not out of the realm of possibility that you could say something that could make somebody else laugh. I remember making David Letterman laugh really hard a couple of times. But you might remember that Adam Sandler, during that period in the early 90s, did a character on Saturday Night Live called Cajun Man. And that's when I said to him, hey, I said, maybe Cajun Man will be here tonight. He sort of looked at me funny. I was like, well, Union Station. And he laughed really hard. And so did his buddy, Steve Koren. Now, if you say to yourself, that name sounds vaguely familiar. Why do I know that name? Well, probably, I would say maybe 20 to 30% of all of the Seinfeld episodes were written by Steve Koren. If you watch the credits, I think they run the credits for the writer at the beginning of the show, you will see that name, Steve Koren. Everybody always talks about Larry David, and Larry David did do the majority of the work, but a lot of other writers wrote scripts, and Steve Koren wrote a lot of them. And at the time, he was just, Adam Sandler's friend who came along with him on the trip, because apparently Adam didn't want to come on his own. So there was Adam, there was Steve Koren. We had a really nice time. And a couple of years later, The Wedding Singer is being released. We got a chance to sit down with Adam Sandler.
I don't know, it was just very funny with the soundtrack of this movie, because it really does snap you back to 1985, and I do believe the word is snap, by the way. Why did you guys decide to set this in 85?
Well, what a question. And I'll tell you, we snapped it back, to 85 because I wanted to take the spell off of me singing 90s tunes. I said to myself, I says, if I sing 90s tune, people are going to say, well, Adam, what are you doing? I just heard that on the radio, and it sounded a lot better.
I think a lot of people are going to say, Adam, what are you doing anyhow?
I hear that a lot. Every restaurant I go to.
Well, how would you describe your singing voice? Because I think that it was kind of a joke for a while, and then when people saw you do Opera Man on Saturday Night Live, they were like, hey, wait a minute. Now, there is a vocal quality here. I don't know. Have you ever even had any training?
Yeah, I went to NYU, and this nice man, Alex Yancey, used to tell me where to try to place it. So I can scream for a long time and not lose my voice. I don't know what my singing voice is. I know that when I was a kid, my mom said she liked it, but now it's about just having fun and singing. I try to sing whatever style of song I'm singing. I try to stay true to that style.
You know, there was actually a little quality, like a little Wayne Newton going on there in one or two of those songs last night.
Wayne Newton's that's very. I saw Wayne Newton sing on the Lucy show when he was young. Boy, that guy has a nice voice.
The Lucy show.
Yeah, he sang. He was a young man. He was a guest star, and he sang very high voice, nice.
Mm-hmm. So I've been to some weddings where some weird stuff has happened, and some odd things happen. Obviously, in this story, we don't want to give it away. Ever been to any weddings where things turn out a little different than maybe people had intended?
You know, I haven't. Every wedding I've gone to goes pretty damn well.
Well, good for you. So I guess you're a damn good luck charm.
I guess they call me the rabbit's foot.
And you're still single, right?
Yes, I am.
What kind of girl are you going to marry?
Well, hopefully I'll marry this one woman that I love, and hopefully
funny how it works out that way.
I plan on marrying the woman I love. And if she says no, either that or I'll just be alone. I don't mind. I feel if I don't get to marry this one woman, I don't deserve. I should be alone and miserable. And when I'm alone and miserable, I get to eat, and I like eating.
Well, this character does a lot of wrestling with the idea of what he does for a living. Kind of decides that maybe being a wedding singer isn't that cool after all.
Right.
If things had not gone as well for you as they've gone in show business and in comedy, what do you think you'd end up doing?
Mooching off my brother or my sisters. I definitely lucked into doing this. My career didn't come from like I was a 5-year-old dreaming of it. It came from when I was 17 and I had to say my major in college, and I was asking, what am I going to major in? I have no idea what I can do with my life, and my brother just goes, acting, do the acting.
So you still have no idea, though, how to answer that question, though. Like, what if all of that hadn't happened?
Yeah, nothing. I don't know. I got fired as a dishwasher. I got fired as a busboy. I got fired as a waiter. I got fired making sandwiches.
Wait a minute. Why do you get fired as a dishwasher? How many things can you actually do wrong washing dishes? The dishes either end up clean or they're not clean.
Turns out they caught me faking going to the bathroom too much. I kept telling the guy I was working with, I gotta go to the bathroom, I got a nervous stomach. He'd go, what? You have a nervous stomach every day. So I just sit in the toilet, not going to the bathroom, just not wanting to touch dishes. Yeah. And so I think they opened the door on me, and so I wasn't actually moving.
And we know you don't have a nervous stomach, really, because you're one of the people, when you visited our fair city, you actually went up in the arch.
I dug it up there. I got to see the town, and I got to feel all the love.
It's The Wedding Singer, and it's Adam Sandler, and congratulations. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. Okay. I'm going to say hi to Corn for you.
Please do.
That big man came over to my house when Farley passed away. He came over that night. We hung out.
And you can just tell from talking to him what a regular guy he is. He's got all the money in the world. And by the way, it's nice to see him doing drama now. This movie on, it's either Netflix or Amazon. I can't remember. I can never tell the two apart. This movie with George Clooney called J. Kelly. And I didn't like the movie that much, but Adam Sandler is really good in it. And just like Punch Drunk Love, when he does dramatic stuff, I mean, he's really, really a good actor. More about him a little bit later on. Another guy, speaking of movies, this guy with not the greatest reputation for being a nice guy in Hollywood is Richard Dreyfuss. Richard Dreyfuss has had a lot of ups and downs in his career. He was driving a Bentley through Beverly Hills years ago and flipped it over, which I don't know how you do, because the speed limit in that area, like around Rodeo Drive and stuff like that, is like 30 miles an hour. So I don't know how you flip a Bentley, but he did. And, he had a cocaine issue, a couple of different cocaine issues. And he's been known to be a little difficult from time to time, but he's a damn good actor. Man, he's good. And it was 30 years ago today. Is it 30? 96? 06, 16, 26? Yeah. 30 years ago this week, that a movie he starred in, which was sort of a departure for him. It's sort of out of character for him to play a role like this in Mr. Holland's Opus. That movie, I think, was a lot better than some people gave him credit for. Some critics thought it got a little syrupy. I saw the word hokey a couple of times. I don't know. It's not a perfect movie, but it's definitely worth your time if you never saw it. And he gives an especially good performance in the movie, but that was 30 years ago today. And that big lead up I just did was supposed to take you into the clip of Richard Dreyfuss talking about making that movie. And I just see here that I have Richard Dreyfuss in here, but it's only his comments about the making of Jaws. So I apologize for that. But he said that everybody became friends. It was probably the only time he ever did a movie, he said, where, people ended up remaining friends even after the shoot was done, and we get together and stuff like that. And it was just a really, really unusual experience for him, which I guess is a good thing. I got to tell you how pretty and how nice Uma Thurman was. She did a movie years back called Beautiful Girls. It was with Timothy Hutton and a then 15-year-old Natalie Portman, who was so good in it. You just say to yourself, how can you act that well? How can you show so much facial emotion? How can you express insight as well as you do at age 15? When I was 15, I think I had a paper route, and Natalie Portman is out there just killing it, just absolutely killing it. Cute as can be, tiniest little thing ever. But then you go into the room with Uma Thurman, who was in the movie too. And, I have mixed emotions about telling you this story because she was so nice and she was pretty and welcoming and just smiling and just seemed to be having the greatest time, which is not always how these people are. They're like, God, I got to sit here and talk to some doofus from St. Louis, and then the guy from Denver, and then the guy from New Orleans, and then the chick from Montreal, and the whole thing. And I'm sitting here and it's not even noon. And, so a lot of people aren't really happy about doing press junkets, but she was taking it in stride. She was so nice. But the thing that I noticed, because she's like, 6 feet tall? You can't see those sorts of things because they have these people all wired up, strapped in, got the lighting adjusted perfectly, and they're pretty much instructed not to get up and walk around. You just got to sit there for hours and hours and hours, so you can't tell if somebody's tall. It's like when I interviewed Nicole Kidman, not until I saw her later walking down the hallway where I realized, holy crap, she is taller than I thought she was, because I had finished the interview. But again, when you're sitting down, you can't tell always how tall somebody is. So as I'm interviewing Uma Thurman, and I'm thinking to myself, what a nice person, I look down, and did you ever see somebody with water skis on or snow skis? This is what her feet looked like. She had feet that looked like they were about a yard long. I just couldn't even believe how big her feet were. And if you look closely at the dancing scene with John Travolta in Pulp Fiction, you can get a pretty good look at it. But I'll tell you, if you're ever in a windstorm, you want to hold on to her because she ain't blowing over. I wish I had a better way to tell that story, but I'm sorry, I just don't. I have to tell you, my dad started taking me to the Army-Navy football game, which was played every year at Soldier Field in Chicago. We lived about 7 miles from the Chicago lakefront. And, back then, Soldier Field was a pretty primitive place. And you would sit there, and you're only a couple of blocks off Lake Michigan, and the wind starts blowing. I remember when I was a little boy, I saw one of the players run to the sideline, and he was getting a drink, and he was toweling off. And the temperature was about 10 degrees. And I said to my dad, I go, is he sweating? You're like, yeah, he's sweating. I'm like, how can he be sweating when it's like 10 degrees out? And he just sort of looked at me like, man, I gave birth to a real dumb one, didn't I? Sometimes as a dad, you have to do it. You just got to look the other way and smirk to yourself. But this football game tonight is going to be epic. I'll tell you, back in the playoffs in 1986, I believe it was January 1986. Everybody remembers Sean Landetta? He was a kicker for the Rams for a season or two. Back in the mid-'80s, he was punting for, I believe it was the New York Giants. And there was a playoff game where they had to come into Soldier Field, and the playing conditions were just awful. The winds were gusting like crazy. That's a bowl. So a lot of times you get wind that would swirl around the stadium. And the wind, there were these big gusts and everything. And at one point, Sean Landeta dropped the ball to kick it, dropped it as you're supposed to do, sort of above your foot. And as his foot came up to kick the ball, a wind came and blew it right off the top of his foot. It was recovered by a defensive back by the name of Sean Gale. Odd I would remember his name after all these years, and he picked it up and ran it for a touchdown. The playing conditions tonight at Soldier Field, they're talking about light snow or snow showers, wind gusts of 30 to 40 miles an hour, with a game time temperature somewhere in the vicinity of about 12 or 13 degrees, producing a wind chill factor somewhere in the vicinity of 15 to 20 degrees below zero. Stan and your LA Rams, Stan, up your mustache freezes off. This is a time of year where a lot of people go on a cruise. Cruises seemed a lot more fun before we found out how often things can go bad. And when they go bad on a cruise, you are in a lot of trouble because you can't get off. And you got these stories of norovirus where everybody on the ship is just puking like crazy. And then you get the stories about the electrical failures and the toilets backing up and just, water of unknown origin, probably stuff from the toilets flooding the hallways and the rooms. I went on my first cruise on yesterday's date in 2004. It was a radio station thing. They said, we're going to fly you down to New Orleans, and then you'll go on like a week-long cruise, and you're going to take a bunch of listeners along, some contest winners, people who sign up for the trip, whatever the case may be, and you get to go. And so I was like, wow, great. I've never been on a cruise. This will be fun. Well, the room was so small, even the cockroaches were hunchbacks. Good morning, everybody. Or as Henny Youngman once said, I was in my room and all night long, there's a girl banging on my door, banging on my door, banging on my door. I finally got up out of bed and let her out. All right, so here's my problem with cruises, aside from what we already discussed here with these, awful conditions that sometimes, and you can't get, there's no way out. But what I remember is this, that it would be about 6 o'clock and the sun was already down. And as you're cruising along there, they tell you come down to the dining room, cafeteria, whatever they want to call it, and you're looking out the window at the coastline of Mexico. And I remember looking out thinking to myself, right now, there are people drinking margaritas and eating fantastic Mexican food and dancing on tables and singing through the streets. And there's mariachi bands playing. All of that stuff is going where I see all those lights along the coastline of Mexico. And where am I? I'm on a boat eating pork chops. Just doesn't make sense to me.
I'm in New York in my office where people wear clothes because it's cold while you're at a bar in Miami watching bimbos walk by in bikinis. I never look at other men because I have you, but you look at bimbos in bikinis. Do you have to? I don't like Miami. There's too much flesh out of control. When someone's boobs are in your face, how can you see their soul? And then it's like lust is rampant and all I see are bikinis and bimbos and MTV and Playboy and commercials on streets everywhere. You'd have to be blind not to notice them. They're blind. Hey, if you were blind, our love could work. So I think I'll just get a knife and stab your eyes out. But I don't want you to be blind because then you couldn't see me. So I guess I'll have to just go to a gym and work out real hard and buy a bikini. I'll buy a bikini.
My goodness gracious. Thank you, Victoria Jackson of Saturday Night Live. 10 years ago, we lost David Bowie, and it came as quite a shock to people because I don't think most people even knew that, there was anything wrong with him. So when it was announced, people were like, oh my God, I didn't know.
10 years. Oh my gosh. It seems like it's just a year or two ago.
You were, as I recall, a pretty big Bowie fan.
I love David Bowie. Really did. I really liked his every one of his personas. And the more I learned about him, the more I learned that he was really into creating that persona, but it wasn't who he was. A lot of people will do something, a character, and especially the weirder characters, and they become kind of weird themselves because of it, or they do it because they're kind of weird, so to speak. But he, between his Ziggy Stardust and his Aladdin Sane, and then his later work when he became the guy in the white leisure suit and all those, it was just always a stage presence, and he put on those costumes and masks to do the performance, and which is why he was so good in concert, because he could emulate the spirit of those genres really, really well. It was a very, very good concert. Extremely talented guy, and a big loss to us.
And I'll tell you something else about Bowie that a lot of people don't know. He went to grade school with Peter Frampton. I think one of their parents was a school administrator or something like that. But anyhow, after Peter Frampton had his incredible rise with Frampton Comes Alive, which, by the way, came out 50 years ago last week. And then, of course, he had the Sgt. Pepper thing, and he crashed pretty much as fast as he rose. It was, in fact, David Bowie that encouraged him to start playing again after he was sort of, down and out and depressed and not really knowing where to go with his career. It was Bowie who came along and said, why don't you play with us for a while? And it began Frampton's comeback.
Right, and he took him out on his Glass Spiders tour, which was a great album. Was a very good tour. And the thing I remember most about that tour is he didn't play any of his old stuff. He didn't go back older than about 80 with Heroes and stuff. And a lot of that was because he wanted to focus on the stuff that would give Peter Frampton more of a spotlight with his guitar work. They didn't do any of the goofy stuff. They didn't do any of the Spiders from Mars and all that kind of stuff. And they actually had Peter Frampton play a lot of solo stuff with the spotlight on him in that tour. It was very, very cool. Really, really neat story about two friends.
All right, back to the car business. Here we go, the beginning of the new year. And what do you want people to know about what's going on at Weber Chevrolet these days?
It's going to be a big year. We're resetting things. We got new incentives out there. Pricing is probably about the same as what it's been. But as we start things on the new year, we are a little bit down on our inventory because of the good December. And when they stop producing the last week of the month and the first week of this month, it's a little bit off kilter from the normal month after month production of cars. So we're a little bit down on our inventory, but our prices haven't changed at all because of it. They're still going to be good. You can always buy stuff and put your name on it coming in, but we have a lot of pre-owned vehicles. Trade-ins do that for us. Just check our website. I think you'll really, really like what you see. I know we're the best people to buy from because our prices are the best. And if you look at the reviews, we are by far the best reviewed Chevy dealer in a large radius, several hundred miles. You got to go a long way away. And that's based on reputation.com and dealerrater.com. So I just know we're the best place to buy.
All right, it's great to hear your voice again and reconnect and everything. Best to your family. I know been a lot of up and downs, like you were saying, and hopefully it'll be a good 2026 for everybody. Skip Weber, Weber Chevrolet, 3 locations. Granite City, Columbia, Illinois, Olive 270, and online at WeberChevrolet.com. The Weber Automotive Group includes the Ford dealership in Granite City that specializes, I guess you would say, in a lot of like service vehicles and delivery type stuff. And, if you got a business that requires that, you should check that out too. Skip, have a great week. We'll talk to you in a couple of days. Thanks.
Sounds good, JC. Take care.
It's JC's Sunday Showgram on NewsTalkSTL.
We don't play a lot of music here on the Sunday Showgram, maybe one song or two spread across the 2 hours. And I played that song, number one, because it's a great song from Jimmy Buffett, but also there's a major crisis in our house as we speak. I want to go back to something that we talked about with regard to Christmas movies, and it's a movie called 29th Street, and it is one of my all-time favorite movies and on the short list of my all-time favorite Christmas movies. And it's a movie almost nobody has heard of. I swear everybody who's heard of it heard about it from me or Siskel and Ebert, because that's how I found out about this movie called 29th Street. And it's the real life story of the guy who won the first New York State Mega Millions lottery. And one of the scenes in that movie has to do with the character, Frank Pesh, is a young guy, and he's from New York, and he starts dating this Puerto Rican girl at work. And the first time he takes her out, he walks her back home, and she lives, as I recall, just on the edge of Harlem. And he walks her up to the door, gives her a little peck on the cheek. He walks out of the lobby of the building and is immediately shivved by a couple of Puerto Rican boys who don't like the idea that this white kid, this Italian kid, is involved in a relationship with one of their Puerto Rican gals. And again, keep in mind, this is all based on a true story. So they take him to the hospital because he's bleeding to death, and they manage to save his life. They stitch him up, but in the process of checking out his vital signs and taking blood and everything like that, and X-rays, they discover that he has a giant tumor growing inside of his body, and him getting stabbed actually ended up saving his life, because when he goes into the hospital for the knife wound, they discover the tumor, they remove it, and he goes on to live a long, healthy life. Getting stabbed turns out to be a good thing. The reason I mention that is because we had a not exactly similar situation, but similar enough. So our dog, Luna, who's only 7 years old, our dog, Luna, and by the way, she's the belle of the neighborhood. We have her on one of those little posts that just screw into the ground, and then it gives her about 25 feet of, 360 in the yard. And so she runs around. We have it measured so the chain only goes as far as the edge of the sidewalk. Well, people come through the neighborhood. This is a very dog-friendly neighborhood, and people come in and out of this neighborhood with their dogs all the time, and everybody knows Luna. You think this is a joke. It's not. There are lots of people in this neighborhood who know her name that don't know ours, don't know mine, but they all know Luna. She's the belle of the neighborhood. She's such a sweetie, and she plays with all the other dogs, and she's just a great dog. When I was a kid, my father, when he was a very young boy, had a bad experience with a dog. This was a long time ago, and we know a lot more now about the care and the treatment of animals now than we did back when my dad was a little boy. And you had dogs running loose in Chicago and stuff like that. He had a very, very bad experience. So we were not allowed to have pets in our house. Now, eventually we broke him down and we were able to get a couple of cats. And he wasn't even crazy about that, but absolutely no dog. So I never had a dog in my life. Then I got married. And one of the first things we did is we got a yellow lab by the name of Harry, and he was great, but he got sick, and we had to put him down before he was even 10 years old. And it was one of the worst days of my life. Sometimes people will snicker after you walk away, after you tell them about losing an animal, losing a pet. And I feel sorry for those people that they never experienced the kind of relationship with an animal that a lot of us have. And Harry was he was one of the family. We just hated to lose him. So 7 years ago, we decided, well, maybe it's finally time. Francesca was maybe 4 or 5 years old at the time, and she really wanted a dog. And I thought to myself, that might be fun to have a dog again. And one day, Luna shows up and, a rescue, a black lab mix. Laura, the woman who in Webster was fostering Luna, had her for 7 months. She was the runt of the litter, all black, and apparently nobody wanted her. And she grew up in the backyard of this woman that we got to know who had cats and dogs and pigs and everything like that. So Luna grew up as a real free spirit, and she's just been a great dog to us. So the other day, she breaks into the frickin' garbage, and it was a bad can of garbage, too. It's a lot of meat remains. There's chicken. When I found the remains spread all over the house, I noticed that there weren't very many chicken bones left, meaning she had to have eaten the chicken bones as well as what was left of the chicken. And by the way, if you're saying to yourself, aren't you more vigilant about keeping the dog out of the trash? Let me tell you what happened. We have a lanai, which is a fancy way in Florida of saying it's a deck that leads out to the pool. And we have one sliding glass door that goes out to the lanai from the bedroom and another sliding door that goes out to the lanai from the living room. Well, we have a cat, too, and the cat likes to go out on the lanai. So what I did is I cracked the sliding door just a little bit so the cat could get in and out. But then I locked the dog in the bedroom, and the sliding door in the living room going out to the lanai, that was also cracked a little bit. And what this dog did after I left is she nosed open the sliding door, went out onto the lanai, then nosed open the other door, which allowed her back into the house, into the living room, which at that point she got to the trash, which was locked, by the way. There's a little snap lock on it, but she figured out that if she knocks it on the ground, if she knocks it over, a lot of times that latch will just pop open, and that's what she did. It's like, living with the Pink Panther here, So that's how she got into the garbage. Anyhow, the next day, which was Thursday, she started to not look good. And I just thought to myself, I'm going to go pick up my daughter from school. If I come back and this dog is still just laying in the bed sideways and just not eating, not drinking, not doing anything, she's going to the vet. So sure enough, came back and she was still in that condition. I actually had to carry her. This is a 58-pound dog. And I had to carry her to the car. Now we get to the vet. We explain everything that I just told you. And they're like, okay, well, we're going to have to do a lot of tests here. So they do, blood work, and they do x-rays, and they do, I think they did an ultrasound. They did all that stuff because they need to know if there's an obstruction. He comes out, he goes, well, I got good news and bad news. The ultrasound and the x-ray didn't show anything. It was all negative and everything. But we found some really weird stuff in her blood. Her blood work came back really goofy. I want your permission to do another blood test. It's going to cost a little, but we got to do another blood test. I'm like, well, sure, absolutely. Because we're at about $700-800 already. So sure enough, the blood test comes back weird, and they're like, you got to get this dog to a hospital because her platelets are way, way down. I think you're supposed to be at about 130 count, and hers was down to about 60,000. And, if it gets down to 30, they start bleeding internally. And, without getting all gory about it, took her out to the car and had to drive about a half an hour to the animal hospital. And sure enough, they took her in and they kept her overnight. So now they're like, we have to do a lot more testing, but it's going to cost you. And I'm like, well, how much is it going to cost me? And they're like, well, our estimate is somewhere in the vicinity of maybe a little over $4,000. And by the way, we need that right now before we continue. Well, who the hell walks around with $4,000? I don't have my checkbook with me. My credit cards are not in terrific shape right now, given the fact that Christmas was just about 3 weeks ago. So I think, my credit cards are like in recovery shape right now. So I'm like, well, where am I? I have $4,000 right now. I'll call my stockbroker in the morning. We'll sell some stock. I'll get you the $4,000 I have. No, we can't do that. Well, what do you mean you can't? Can't let the dog die, for God's sakes. So I had to bring her home, believe it or not. Now I'm scrounging around for money, and I finally got the money scraped up. We take her back, and she's still in the hospital right now. Now, I've gotten 2 updates already from the animal hospital, and they're like, well, we're working with her. Her fever is down, and we're giving her all this antibiotic stuff and all that, but we're about to start doing like an ultrasound or a sonogram or whatever they do. We got to rule things out, and on and on and on and on it goes. So as it stands right now, we don't really know what the status of our dog is, other than what I told you. She's stable, but it will make you stop, and it'll make you reflect. Because you're thinking to yourself, I don't know if our dog's going to make it. And we still don't know. And you start thinking about every time she ran up to you with her ball in her mouth and wanted to play, but you were busy doing something else and weren't able to play with her. Or sometime where she looked at you like, oh, I would love to go for a walk. You can just tell from the expression on the dog's face that it wants to go outside, and you're not able to do it for whatever reason. Or just some morning where you thought, maybe we could go to the dog park. She loves it there. But you're like, you get busy doing something else, and then it gets too late, and you end up not doing it. Well, something like this happens, and if we get her back, I can tell you I won't be making those mistakes anymore, those errors in judgment. She's only 7 years old. So cross your fingers, and for those of you who pray, throw something Luna's way. How about it? Okay, we'll come back and wrap up JC's Sunday Showgram for January 18th, 2026 coming up. And in the meantime, we've beaten this one to death. Have a good one. See you later. Bye.